Hello everyone, welcome to AI Anytime channel. In this video, we are going to extend the part 1 of the Llama 2 deployment on AWS SageMaker. So we already have deployed the Llama 2 through DLC, deep learning containers, in the first part of this video series. And in this one, we are going to use the model endpoints, create a Lambda function, create a function URL, and also create an API gateway. Everything that what I said, Lambda function to function URL to API gateway, and see how we can leverage this model through an API, okay, through an REST API, and that's what we're gonna do in this video. Without any further delay, let's jump in and write some code. So you can see here, this is what we did in the previous video, the part 1 video. I'll give the link in the description, and you must watch part 1 before this video, where we have deployed Llama 2. You can take any other model, any other models which is supported by DLC, deep learning containers on AWS SageMaker. Okay, and so we need Lambda function. The if you see here, I am on this AWS Lambda dashboard. It says let's you run code without thinking about servers. It's serverless, so you don't have to worry about the servers. AWS takes care of it for you. It does all the heavy lifting in that case. So you only pay for what your end users are basically consuming. Okay, it's extremely powerful. One of the most used services in AWS when it comes to DevOps. Now it says author a Lambda function from scratch or choose from the pre-built templates, etc., or pre-configured examples. I'm gonna click on create a function here. You can see it supports .NET. Makes sense, right? The legacy application. Then we have Java. Then we have Node.js with a Python, etc., etc. You can also define your custom runtime, and you can do that. We'll be interested in Python. That's what I know more than any other languages which are listed over here. So let's click on create a function. Now when you create a function, it says author from scratch, use a blueprint. So when you click a blueprint, they will give you some sample code and configured examples, presets. And then you also have container images. Now you can pick a container image, like we picked a deep learning container for model deployment. You can also pick a container image for Lambda function. Let's do it from scratch, which is pretty easy, and I'm gonna call it I'm gonna call this Llama Lambda. Okay, I'm just going to give it a name. You can also do that. Now you have runtime. Now in the runtime, I'm gonna select Python 3.11. Everything looks good to me. You have changed default execution role. For now, let's keep it, create a new role, and maybe we can attach some inline policies later on from IAM roles. Okay, this is not an AWS video, guys. There are thousands of videos already available on AWS. Okay, so this is just, we have deployed a large language model, how we can use that through a REST API. That's what we're gonna do here. So let's click on create function. Now once you click on create function, you can see it's the buffering doing something here. It might take a few seconds, up to a minute also, depending on how the traffic is. Currently you can see creating the function Llama Lambda, excuse me, sorry. And you can now change its code and configuration. To invoke your function with a test event, choose test. So we're gonna test also. We're gonna write some test with JSON and all, and we're gonna do it. Okay, a couple of things quickly. You can see your code having you're making changes. Okay, fine. You can see here we have a Llama Lambda, which is your function overview, your Lambda function. Now you can keep on adding layers, okay, and you can trigger it, basically invoke that model endpoints that we have deployed. So what I mean by model endpoint is, let me show you. So when you click on this, here in this case, you can see we have deployed our models. The model has been deployed. You can see this LLM model.deploy, and we got it succeeded here. Okay. Now once you see it in the SageMaker console or the dashboard, you will see within inference. So let's go on the inference and see within endpoints, and you can within endpoint you will see one of the endpoint has been succeeded. Let's go inside this endpoint because we need this endpoint, and we're gonna use this endpoint to put it in the Lambda function so it can invoke that endpoint. Okay, this is how it looks like. It has code, it has test, it has monitor, configuration, aliases, versions. Okay, and I'm going to explain few of it. And then you have lambda function, environment variable, etc., etc. You can see here you write your lambda function.py, and this is where I'm going to write lambda function.py, all of its logic that we needed. So the first thing that we need is we need a Python client. We need a client to connect with that, right? So the model endpoint. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to say, okay, import Boto3. Boto3 is the client. So import Boto3. And the next is let's define our endpoint name, the model endpoint that we have. So the very so let's call it endpoint name. It's like for now it's a constant, we're not gonna change it. So your endpoint is nothing but this. So let's just copy it here. We're just gonna copy, come, paste, and after that we need a runtime. So we need a Boto3 client runtime. So for that let's have runtime equals Boto3.client. So let me do Boto3.client and runtime SageMaker. So runtime.SageMaker, because that's where we're gonna leverage that deployed model, okay, which is on SageMaker endpoint. Okay, runtime.SageMaker. This makes sense. Now we have a Lambda handler where we have your event and context. So what we have to do, we have to we need a prompt, guys, right? So we need a prompt. We have to create a payload with the inference parameter, and where we will pass our prompt. The prompt will be nothing but will be called as a query in this case. So let's define that. So the first thing that we have to do, let's call it query parameter. So we're gonna call it query params, and within that query params, I'm gonna use this event. It's an event that is gonna trigger it. So every time you call that lambda function, that event will get triggered, and that's what we're going to define here. Okay, and event is also an input parameter for lambda handler function. So when I write event, and it takes a string, so we're going to call it query string parameters. So query string parameters, I hope I spelled it right, query string parameters. Okay, and now our query is, so query is nothing but we're gonna use get. So query params dot get. So let's do that here. Query params dot get, and I'm gonna pass my query. Query is, and this query becomes your prompt. Now the line number 10 that you see, the variable query, it becomes your prompt now. Okay, so query equals query params dot get, and now what we have to do is we have to write our payload. So I'm not gonna write the payload. I'm just going to copy our payload from here. We already have defined a payload, so let's just copy this. So let me just copy and paste. So you can see we have pasted our payload here, and in this payloads we're gonna change this prompt. We cannot give it prompt now. This prompt becomes your query. So let's just change it. So let me just change this inputs query, and then this looks nice. Okay, after that we're gonna also use response. Let me just make this little right. Excuse me. This was right anyway. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to basically write a response variable, and in this response we're gonna invoke that endpoint. So again, use runtime.invoke. It has invoke underscore endpoint module, and inside this invoke underscore endpoint we're gonna keep endpoint name, and that endpoint name is nothing but your endpoint name, and then you have content type, which is application JSON. So let's do that, content type, and this content type is nothing but application, and this application, and then JSON, and then we have body equals JSON dot dumps. Now let's do that, and let's pass our payload here. Exactly. Okay, so what we are doing here is we are going to invoke that endpoint. We're going to passing our endpoint name, which we are defined in the line number 4, and then we have a content type, which is application JSON. You can also have a look at HTML if you want to do that, and then I'm going to also dump whatever I have in the payload and give it to that. You're going to invoke that model endpoint. So Lambda handler will invoke it. Okay, then we have response. Now let's print that response in case. So let's print this response. Let's call a variable called generation. So generation equals, I'm going to call it json.loads, and in this json.loads, not repetition penalty, that will be response, and the body of that response. We're going to need the body. So the body, excuse me, dot read. We're going to read that body value. So body read and then decode it to UTF-8. So let's decode UTF-8. Excuse me, UTF-8. It's all small, not caps. Okay, this looks good. Generation JSON.loads response. So this is fine. Now just last thing, our final response, because we only need the generated text. You can see it over here in the here we have the generated text, right? Somewhere you can see the generated text. That's what we need. So let's quickly write that. The final response equals generation, and I'm gonna pass the first and the generated text. Generated underscore text. That's what we need. Okay, generated underscore text. Okay, and the first thing that we return is extra code which is right. That also let's put some headers, and I'm gonna say headers, and within this headers, which is a key value pair, so it will be a dictionary access control. So let's access control allow origin. We also want to use a function URL, and I will show why we need a function URL, in which case we need a function URL and not an API gateway. Okay, and let me just do an star. Okay, so every access allow is like any route, right? So access control allow origin, and I'm just gonna give it, and this will not be hello from Lambda, by the way. This will be your final response. Okay, and then what we are doing here, guys, we have an import JSON boto3, and then we have endpoint name, then we have a runtime boto3.client, runtime SageMaker. Then to do implement query params, query string parameters, query params.get query, some payloads, runtime.endpoint name, content type. It looks nice. So now let's move on, to your writing. So let's click on deploy. I'm just going to deploy it. Once you click on deploy, you can see it says successfully updated the function Llama Lambda. Now you have deployed this Lambda function. How are you going to test this, if this works or not? Okay, so for that you have to click on this test. Now once you click on that test, it says to invoke your function without saving an event, configure the JSON event, then choose test. Like for example, if you see the right hand side top. Now let's create a new and let's call it generate data. Okay, so what I'm going to say is generate data, which is just like a event to test this Lambda function out. So let's do that. Let's keep it private. Hello world is okay, and here we are going to write my event JSON. So let's do that, and then we'll format JSON. The first thing is our HTTP method. So our HTTP method is going to be get in this case. Please do post as well. If you want to do some exercise, I'll recommend post method for this, to be honest. Okay, HTTP method get. At least you can better control your both request and responses. Okay, then path from URL and on the UI as well. It depends what you want to do. We have a path, and here comes our query string parameter. So query string, and then it is parameters, query string parameters, and again a key value pair, a dictionary, and here goes my query. So the first query, and you can define couple of queries, empty. So in query, let's write how should I take care of my pets in winter. This is my query, and the reason I am asking this query is because in the coming videos we are going to build a very good application, very cool application that's called pet care. We are going to build that using different set of case studies, documents. We'll create embeddings, and then we'll leverage this deployed model, and again we'll deploy that app on AWS as well. That's why I'm asking this query, just for your information, guys. You should stay tuned. If you're waiting for that, you should wait for that video as well. Very soon we are working on it. So query, and after that let's pass param2. So let me just call it param2, and you just can keep value 2 or something. Just keep it empty or something. It is okay. Now let's click on format JSON. Now once you click on format JSON, now what I have to do, let's click on save first, and you can see I have saved, and now let's click on test. and you can see it says executing function failed. It says an error occurred, access denied exception. Okay, makes sense because it says with no identity based policies allow the SageMaker invoke endpoint. Let's fix this, guy. So what do you have to do? Let's click on IAM, identity access management. Let's right click on that, open this IAM management console, and what you have to do in this case, let's click on roles, and clicks on role, and then I have to go with let me just have a look. You're gonna click on this one, and you can see once you come inside it, it says Llama Lambda role UI B not a FAQ or whatever. Here you have to add permissions. Now let's attach policies. When you click on attach policies, we're gonna give full access to SageMaker. So let's click on that SageMaker and search for it. Okay, and you can see you can assign Amazon SageMaker full access, and come down, add permissions, clicked on add permissions, and that's it. Here you can see now we have Amazon SageMaker full access to this particular Lambda function or the Lambda instance that we have. Now go back here, let's minimize this, click on test again and see. And you can see it says task timed out after 3 seconds. It's perfectly fine, right? We are doing it live, no edits, no cuts, right? So let's fix this out. Okay, so when you have to go to code, now once you go to code, you have to go to configuration of that Lambda function. Now once you go to configuration, you have to go to excuse me, configuration, not permission, let me just go to code. Configuration, not environment variable. Okay, test. Okay, yes, test. And then we have monitor, configuration, general configuration, sorry, excuse my bad, general configuration, and you click on timeout, you increase this timeout. So you currently see it's 3 seconds, let's increase it till 5 minutes, and let's click on save. Now once you click on save, it says updating the function Llama Lambda. See, Lambda function is being used when an event is triggered. That's how generally it happens. For example, if you are adding some clause or some objects on an e-shopping website or an e-commerce website, when you add to cart, an event gets triggered. That's an event when you add to cart, right? And when you hit to book some tickets, some plane tickets, an event get triggered. So event is something like, and in that you need faster responses, and that's where Lambda is being used, and that's why they need a low latency kind of a thing, some low latency sort of a thing, and that's why by default the time is around 3 seconds, but you can increase that time in Lambda function. And when we go to API gateway, we'll talk about it, because API gateway has a timeout limit of 29 seconds. So if you are really concerned about your large language model which is too big and takes times to respond, probably will avoid API gateway and go with the function URL that I will show in bit. Now once we increase this to 5 minutes 3 seconds, let's go back to test again, and once we go to test and again click on test, so let's see. It says executing function started 9 seconds or something, so it's taking time. Of course it will take around 15 to 20 seconds. So, and that's where we have to make sure that what machine that you are using, and you can see we have succeeded. Okay, and we got our response. So if you see this, it says body, how should I take care of my pets in winter? And we have response. Here are some tips to help keep your pets safe and healthy during the winter months. And all these are line breaks, by the way. Provide a warm and comfortable living space. Make sure your pet has a warm and comfortable place to rest and sleep. So perfect, we got our response. Our Lambda function is working completely fine. And now we can create a function URL or an API gateway or both, to test it out. Let's do that, guys. So what I'm gonna do here is, now let's go to, let me bring my monitor. Yeah, so let's now go back to code and of course configuration. Now what we are doing here, guys, okay, you would have worked with Azure function or Google Cloud Function. I don't know if you have worked with those. Azure Functions and Google Cloud Functions, they are very powerful. Okay, but it depends. It's a trade-off when it comes to API gateway versus function URL. It's a trade-off. Okay, people who are really looking, who are working in production, they will probably go with API gateway because it provides more customization, control, security, etc. Okay, now let's go to function URL first. Now here, what you can do, you can configure your function URL. You can create a function URL that will leverage that Lambda function, and it will basically generate the response for you. Okay, so let's see that. So when you click on create function URL, you click on this none. First of thing, that none auth type. You're not authenticating with an AWS IAM, but you can also do that if you want to increase the security of your services. Now buffered is okay. Click on this configure cross origin, like we already have cores assigned to it, and that's it. So what you have to do here is, now you don't have to make any changes in this one. Okay, so let's click on save. Now once you click on save, you can see it says your function URL is public. Anyone with the URL can access this Lambda function, the function that we have created. Now when you click on this function URL, you can, of course, you can see the auth type, invoke. You can again edit it and update it. I'm just showing you. When you click on this, it says internal server error because you have to pass your, so you have to pass your query. So let me just pass the query, what is AI or something. So let's do that. And I said, okay, I'm passing /? query. What is, something like that. Okay, what is AI? Or you ask any question, that's just for trial. Okay. So we are testing the deployed large language model, which is Llama2 in this case. We are testing the Lambda function and see if it's working or not. And you can see the fantastic response that we have got within few seconds. It says, what is AI? Artificial intelligence refers to the development of computer systems able to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, something. Now this is function URL. We'll go to API gateway in bit. Now let's open our API client. So I'm gonna open Insomnia. I use Insomnia. You would probably be using Postman or something like that. Okay. Now, so what I'm gonna do here is, guys, okay, let me just click on, it's already get. You can see it's get. You can select your method, and you have to come back here. Let me just remove this entire thingy here and click on that. So paste it over here, and the same will go in Postman if you are using Postman or any other API client. You have to click on query. And in query, you can see I already have my query, which is already we were doing that in the URL. And what is AI? Now let's change it to, for example, how should I protect my pets from infection? Now this is my question because we're talking about pet care, because that's the application I'm working on, and that application is coming very soon, guys. A video on how to create an application, the pet care application with RAGs and of this model that we have deployed. Let's click on send. Now once you click on send, what it does, it will take a little time, so let it happen. Okay, I'll come back here, and you can see that this is working in the URL and the function URL over here, and you can look at different permissions, etc. if you want. And you can see it takes around 25 seconds, and you can see it took around 17.9 seconds, excuse me. And this is the question: how should I protect my pets from infection? So here are some ways to protect your pets from infection. Vaccination is the first thing. You have to keep utilizing vaccination, the vaccines, and to keep your pets safe. And then you have a lot of other things here, guys. Regular grooming can help, right? Regular grooming has to be done. The nutrition has to be taken care of. So there are many other things that you need to do when you have a pet, right? This is what we are leveraging, guys. So our function URL is working. Our Lambda function is working. Now let's move to API gateway. Okay, as I said, that API gateway has a timeout of 29 seconds, if I'm not wrong, 29 or 30, by the way. And I don't know if they increase the quota. Maybe if you're working for a big enterprise, maybe they can increase the quota. I'm not sure on that. So now let's click on API gateway here, guys. So let's do that. Now I'm going to click on API gateway, and in the API gateway, what we have to do, you can see it says create, maintain, and secure APIs at any scale. Now you can create your own API on top of your large language model. Currently I'm showing for Llama 2, you can take any models open source model which is supported by DLC, or even it's not supported by DLC, you can manually configure it in SageMaker and put it in an S3 bucket, zip it all together and deploy it through SageMaker class. You can do that, right? So here if you see on the API, you have few options. You have HTTP API, you have REST API, WebSocket API. I'm gonna go with HTTP API in this case just to keep it a little simple. Click on build, and once you click on build, you see some integrations option. Now here in the integration, you click on add integration. When you click on add integration, it has a drop down. Click on drop down and it has two options. Either you use the already created Lambda function, or you can write it together later on your HTTP function or something like that if you have. Okay, HTTP endpoint, by the way. Now when I click on Lambda function, the Lambda, it gives me an option to select the Lambda, to choose the Lambda function or enter its ARN. Okay, so here I'm going to use this one Lambda function. I already have that Lambda function, and I only have one Lambda function, and you can see it's called Llama Lambda. So let's click on that. Now once you click on Llama Lambda, what it does, it asks for an API name. So let's call it Llama API or something. So let's call this Llama API. Now in the Llama API, I'm gonna click on next. Once you click on next, it asks for method. So I'm gonna give get method because that's what I've configured in my Lambda function. So I'm clicking on get, and I'm just doing next here, guys. Now it has a stage name. Of course, you can create multiple stages. I would like to check this off, guys. Auto deploy. Now what stage does? Stages are independently configurable environments for your API. That your API can be deployed to. Now you can have multiple stages. Okay, so now you can read it over here about stages that represent environments, such as development. Now you have one API for development. Now you want to create one API for production, and don't want to mix a lot of things between this, right? You can create different stages for your APIs. Okay, now let's click on next. Now once you click on next, we are sorted, guys. Now let's review and create our API, okay, on Llama2. Now let's click on create. I'm just clicking on create here. Okay, it will take a little time, and you can see it says successfully created API, Llama API over here. We have successfully done it. Now if you see, we can click on deploy here. So you have deploy button, click on deploy. Now once you click on deploy, it asks for select a stage, and our stage is nothing but the default stage that we have selected at that point of time. Now let's click on default, deploy to stage, and we are going to do that. Okay, what it does, you can set successfully updated default stage with a new deployment ID, and we are okay with it, right? So I don't know why I'm doing it again, sorry. Okay, so you can see here stage name, invoke URL. Now let's do one thing. You can see routes, you can see authorization. If you click on the the routes here, click on the get. It shows an attached authorization. You can see no authorizer attached to this route. I'll show you what I'm talking about it. Let's first go to Lambda. Let's click on right click. Now once you go to your Lambda function, you will see something called trigger over there. I'll show you. So you can see a lot of things here. So let me just click on. When you click on API gateway, you will see something called API gateway or Llama API. So the Llama API, when we integrated with your Lambda function at that point of time, you can see your API endpoint. Now let's click on, and of course you can click on details to read about it. You can look at method, etc. I don't know why it's saying method but anyway, let's click on this. So I'm just going to click on this, and again I'm going to click, bring it to Insomnia. I'm going to change this. So let's change the function URL. We already have tested our function URL. I'm going to just change here Llama Lambda. So we have our API, guys, API endpoint. So a model endpoint. Now we have our API. You can use this API wherever you want, in production. Of course, when I say in production, you have to take care of a lot of other things, okay, when you want to scale your solution. But for now, if you just want to deploy your LLMs, create a Lambda function, create a function URL, and create an API gateway, you can do that. Okay, so let's come back here. On this, you can look at your API gateway, etc. And even probably if you get error, let me know if you are getting any error, if you are facing any challenges with this. The reason I deployed this, because now what I will do, I will leverage this, either the function URL or the API that we have created from the gateway. We're going to use this in our application. So we're going to build a pet care application. It is going to be a web app where the end user can ask about any kind of insights related to pet health and pet care. Okay, and I'm collecting a lot of case studies, their health, medical of veterinaries and vets, and we're bringing everything together. We're going to deploy it on AWS as well. But anyway, so this is what I wanted to do. And you can see we have received our in 18 seconds. Function URL took around 17.9 seconds, and the API is taking around 18 seconds. Same thing, right? And you can see it over here, the responses. This is Insomnia API client. You can try it in Postman as well. Fantastic, guys, right? Simple, but you can do a lot of things here, from a protection, security, and privacy standpoint. Customization, you can do that. Probably you have to look at a couple of videos on API gateways or the documentation, guys. AWS documentation is fantastic. Okay, so that's all. That's all I wanted to do in this video, guys. I wanted to leverage that model endpoint, create a lambda function, create a function URL, and also create an API through API gateway. So I hope you liked it. The entire code is available on my GitHub repository. So if you go to my GitHub repository, you can look at this Llama2 deployment on AWS, where I have given instructions, what instructions you have to follow. The Llama2 deployment notebook file, that through DLC how we can deploy it. You also have lambda function.py, and you can use this lambda function for many of your deployments, etc. And then we also have test case lambda, that how we're going to use the test case lambda to create it. So everything has been given, and I hope you like the video. And if you like the video, please hit the like icon, and if you haven't subscribed the channel yet, do subscribe the channel and stay tuned with the channel. A lot of videos are coming on large language model, LLM ops, the guardrails, and some end-to-end projects. Okay, and this is the start of that end-to-end project, by the way. Okay, that's all for this video, guys. Okay, if you have any thoughts, comment, feedbacks, please let me know in the comment box. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.